His name was Qin. It was the Qin dynasty. And he rode around on a chariot. 2,000 years later, in 1787, when George Washington went to his make his inaugural speech, he was still in a horse and buggy. So basically, there was no change in technology over time. And you had feudal systems, you had a lot of different governments that basically had this central planning type of aspect. So when you start to have, and basically where America I feel is very special, is like our country was conceived in liberty of the individual. And we pretty much said, a laissez-faire type of economic policy, and laissez-faire is just French for let them be, let them be. And when you let people basically work on things, what you end up with was like the Industrial Revolution. And a lot of people could say, and some of the things might actually be true about Andrew Carnegie in the steel industry, Rockefeller in the oil industry, Henry Ford in the automobile industry, but the one thing you cannot say is that they created far more wealth for society than they did for themselves. And that's actually, that's what we have. I mean, you can look at the computer industry. Government's pretty much been, you don't see the government going out there and trying to regulate processors. That's from the semiconductor industry and that type of stuff. So you have very, very quick tripling, and semiconductors is also a fairly new industry. But my key point is, when you have freedom, that's actually where you have people allocating the resources, scarce resources, most efficiently, and that's what gives you full production. There's always some waste, but again, the question is, not how many jobs are there, but what can our country produce, and how efficiently. And a lot of times, for instance, we're in an educational institution. The professors here, make their salaries by teaching you, and in a lot of ways, they aren't producing a good. But in a lot of ways, in the society, their services are valued by how much wealth our society can create. So in reality, whether it's a service industry or whether it's a manufacturing industry, they kind of feed off of each other. But what you want is basically wealth being created. And wealth doesn't just need to be material goods. It could also be health care. Anything that increases your well-being is what I call wealth. Please.
What about the things that aren't addressed by a free market society, where people become so individualistic? It's like the tragedy of the commons. Basically, the environment is a good example. They don't want to regulate. They don't want to not put scrubbers in the smokestacks. And they don't want to have to clean the water and everything else. If it's so individualistic, how do you account for these things that will never be addressed or never be taken care of by the free market?
Well, here's the thing. When our founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence, they wrote down life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What they actually meant to write was a phrase by the English philosopher Thomas Locke, which was life, liberty, and property. The reason they said pursuit of happiness was really just because of slavery. So I guess on the environmental aspect and a lot of those things, if you go back to the principle of private property, if you go down to the principle that you have ownership of yourself and yourself only, and you have no right to force anything on anyone. But if I walk around with a cigarette, or if I have a factory that's belching sulfur into the air that you breathe in your neighborhood, I'm infringing upon your private property. So if you preserve private property rights, that's actually pretty much the key. And what's interesting is the Nobel Prize for Economics. I wrote an article on my website a couple days ago. The Nobel Prize for Economics was awarded to a person by the name of Elinor Ostrom that actually not a lot of people have even heard of. But what she actually wrote about was she has some fascinating papers on the commons. And what she wrote, is in some areas they have where they had privatized. She took examples of basically collectivist economies and privatized economies, and she said, look, sometimes the privatized ones survive, sometimes the collectivized ones survive, but there's different reasons why they flourish. And I think one of her examples was she used the Mongolian steppe. And in that area, the soil is actually very poor. And you have Siberia, and then you have Mongolia, then you have Inner Mongolia, which basically belongs to China. In Inner Mongolia, and I've actually been there, they're basically they give everybody like their own plots of land, and it's very collectivist and everything. They're actually ruining the land, polluting like crazy, and like I said, they aren't protecting private property. When you go to Siberia, it's a little bit of the same. But when you go to Mongolia, they basically just use the land as was intended. Like they all share. There's nomads and stuff still. But yet the nature there is actually very, very beautiful, or so I've heard. I haven't made it there. But I guess I would point you in that direction. And if you go to a site called mises.org, MISES.org, and look up, I would say Walter Block and Hans Hermann Hoppe, they actually go quite a bit into the commons, and not just self-ownership, but also basically the principle of first own, first use. So if you own something, you use it first, and vice versa. So, yeah, I mean, what I actually think about in terms of government and in terms of life just in general, the two most important things are really peace and the environment. If you have peace, really, and you can kind of define that as like the absence of war in this case, then you can really kind of go to work on solving your environmental problems. Like during World War II, like in Germany, like when they were running their war, they obviously didn't care at all about their environment. And if you go over to Iraq, you have depleted uranium everywhere. It's just kind of a mess. So it's kind of like, peace first, work on the environment if you can at the same time, but I would say it would be a second priority. Other questions? Okay, well, feel free to stop by. If you want to feel what a gold coin actually feels like, feel free to come on up. We have copies of the Constitution, and if you'd like to sign up on a mailing list and that type of thing. We also have copies of economics in one lesson as well, and a couple other things. So if you're interested at all, feel free to stop up and chat with you guys. But thank you very, very much for having me.